All right, we are on. Hey everyone, I'm your host, Jared Samuels,
And I'm Morgan Mendelson.
and we're bringing you the 26th episode of What's Behind the Game, where you'll get an exclusive look at how all your favorite athletes eat, train, and anything else you'd like to know. Today on the show, we have Oliver Luck. Oliver was one of the top quarterbacks at West Virginia, a quarterback for the Houston Oilers, has held many upper-level sports jobs, including the athletic director position at West Virginia, and is currently the commissioner and CEO of the XFL. So let's welcome Oliver.
Hi.
Thank you for coming on.
Hello, Morgan. Hello, Jared. How are y'all?
Good.
Doing well.
Joining us today. Appreciate it.
I'm glad to be with y'all. You're both in Travis County, right?
No, I go to school up at Texas Tech, so I'm currently in Lubbock, Texas.
Guns up.
Wreck up.
Yeah, and I went to school at UT, so I'm currently there right now.
Very nice.
So,
Yeah.
okay.
So to start off, just kind of like, where did everything start for you? Like, what sports did you play growing up, and how did football come into a big play of that? Like, why football?
I was a child of the 60s. I was born in 1960 and grew up in a very sort of typical Cleveland, Ohio suburb where we played, virtually all the sports, depending on the season. So we played, football in the fall and basketball in the winter, and we did baseball or track and field, in the spring and summer. We just goofed around and pretty much did them all. And so I think the vast majority of my friends, as I look back, we're all involved in sports, and some were better than others. And I think kids, gravitate towards those sports where they, perform maybe a bit better than their peers. Mm-hmm. And in my case, I enjoyed all the sports. I particularly enjoyed basketball, but I think my skill set at the end of the day was probably more attuned towards football. So I went to, played football in high school, also played basketball, and well, I think once you're at that high school level and, you start to get recruited and football coaches are recruiting you and basketball coaches aren't, it's a pretty clear sign that you're probably best set, if you'd like to play college sports, to play the sport that you're being recruited for. So that was my story.
So then how did you choose West Virginia after high school? What stuck out about them?
Well, I had some scholarship offers from a number of different schools, and good academic institutions as well as good football institutions. In the 70s, most kids went to school, relatively close to home, 3-4 hour drive away, but not necessarily a continent away. So things were pretty regional back then. And West Virginia is a good institution. I had a good football program. I enjoyed, I kind of wanted to go to school. I haven't grown up in a big city, Cleveland. I wanted to go to school in a smaller sort of college type town, which is probably a pretty good description of Morgantown, West Virginia. And it's a beautiful, beautiful state, small, but of course a neighboring state with Ohio. It was about a 3.5 hour drive. My parents, my friends, could drive down. Buddies from high school could drive down for games, and that was kind of a fun part of it.
Mm-hmm. When you showed up at West Virginia, were there a lot of expectations placed on you coming in as a quarterback recruit?
Oh, I don't think so. I mean, you have to think about how different, college football was in the 70s. My freshman year was 1978. And compare that to where it is today. I mean, there was no internet. I don't think any recruits had stars. It's a 3-star, it's a 4-star, it's a 5-star. None of that happened. There was no huddle where you could exchange film.
Right.
Coaches, college coaches would spend a lot of time on the phone talking to high school coaches and basically saying to high school coaches, hey, high school coach, you got any good players that might be interested in my college, right? It's a lot of word of mouth, a lot of trust. They actually drove up to watch games. Now you can recruit players solely based on their film and what they do at 11, the elite 11, or all these things. None of that existed, right? So it was really a much different world. So I say that to answer your question, Jared, which is I don't think that there were many expectations on any incoming freshmen, because people really didn't know who you were. They might know what high school you played at, or that you were an all-state player or something, but I don't think there was anywhere near the expectation level that exists today when people come in and they've been on television, they play games on television, they're all over the internet, they've got their own web page and their own huddle account, all those types of things. It was a different era.
So I went back and I looked at your statistics at West Virginia, and like every single year you improved in yards and completion percentage. 1980, your quarterback rating was 130.4. How did you improve each year? Like, what steps did you take to make that improvement every year?
Well, I think in that era, because high schools weren't really throwing the ball, there were very few high school offenses that featured the forward pass. It was still very much a run, kind of a game. I think most quarterbacks, even those that were fairly gifted, came into their freshman year and had to almost start from scratch to learn sort of the complexities of a college offense and to learn, how to read college defenses and blitz reads and all that kind of stuff. So most freshmen hadn't been throwing the ball, right, all that much. So I think you could look at the statistics of, a whole bunch of quarterbacks from the 60s, 70s, even into the 80s, and I think you would find the same thing where they progress from their freshman year to their sophomore year to their junior, senior, because it was all sort of learning, sort of foundational things your first year, and then building on those for your second year, continuing in that regard. It simply was the case that, in high school, I would have been lucky to throw, 12 or 15 passes a game, because that's just the way football was being played back in that era, particularly in Ohio, where most Ohio high school football coaches sort of followed the lead of Woody Hayes and Bo Schembechler, which was 3 yards in a cloud of dust. It wasn't the era where high school quarterbacks were throwing for 500 yards. That might have been the total season yardage achieved for a lot of players. Again, it was a different game. It was very much fun. Certainly enjoyed it. I think you could look back at a lot of guys in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and I think you'd see that same kind of progression.
Now, I know like nowadays it's like really big for athletes to have a certain preparation, or if they do before a big game, prepare a certain way. Did you have any like routine that you would do to prepare? And if like, did it change for any like bigger games like the 1981 Peach Bowl against Florida?
I don't think that my preparation for a game really changed that much. I don't think there was anything really interesting about it. You do pretty much what I think the vast majority of players do, which is try to, get a good night's sleep and, eat appropriately, before a game, make sure you hydrate, make sure you're stretched, etc. Mentally, you've got to, you don't want to get, focused too early, because you can't, spend 3 days or 72 hours focused on the game, but you kind of work your way into that space where you've got a game coming up and you want to be mentally and physically alert, etc. I didn't have any, superstitions. I put my pants on the way everybody else put their pants on, or so I'm not sure that there's unique about my preparation. I think most players do, the same thing over and over again, because it doesn't require much thought process, and you're in a little bit of zone as you prepare for a game. Certainly the day of the game, at least.
Right. Okay. Now we're going to take a little bit of a transition here. You won multiple awards related to your academic career. And how were you able to handle your academics along with being a college quarterback? I know specifically with athletes, the colleges try their best to help athletes maintain their academic career by having study hours and having an advisor handy to them at all times. Did any of those things help with you?
I think the universities for years have done a pretty good job of trying to set up a structure, right, for their athletes, football, basketball, soccer, you name it, because, it is time consuming. You are tired, you're beat up. Sometimes you need treatment to stay healthy, and, you may miss a class or two because of travel. So there's all sorts of, sort of help provided by the schools to allow you to do your sport at the highest level, but also do what you're really in school for, which is, to learn and make progress towards a degree. I think I came out of a household where education was valued.
Mhm.
I went to a really good elementary school. I went to a college prep high school. I learned how to write well, which I think is important. So I don't think that I needed study halls and the tutors that others did, but that's simply because of the sort of background that I came to college with. And at the end of the day, I wanted to do well academically because I thought it was important to do well.
Yeah.
Academically. Enjoyed learning and still do. So, I didn't need to take advantage of a lot of the programs that the university offered, but that's simply because I came in pretty well prepared.
That's good. Do you have any?
Sorry.
Do
Go
you have
ahead.
advice for anyone who is coming in and isn't really sure how to manage the two?
Well, yeah, I would absolutely day one, as a college freshman, certainly if you're an athlete, make sure that you know what services are provided: study hall, tutors, summer school. Sometimes there's even classes that you can take during the spring or a fall break. Sometimes there's classes that you can take that teach you how to study and how to take notes properly, because there's all sorts of, not shortcuts, but there are things that can really help you do well academically. So I would make sure that from day one that every student is aware of what's offered and takes advantage of it until that student really feels as though he or she is able to make it, without maybe the help that is always there if needed.
Mhm. So when you were drafted in the NFL, what was the step up in competition like, or the step up in the game? I know that back then it was a lot more. Now it's more skewed to the offense, the rules, so it's probably a little different. And you came out throwing all the time, and back then it was more skewed to the defense. So what was that like? Just that step up in competition, and how did you approach that?
Well, I think anytime you go from one level to another, right? You go from high school to college. There's a big increase in the quality of not just your teammates, but the quality of your opponents as well. And the game's faster, and it takes a while to sort of adjust to that game. Same thing certainly is true of going from college to any professional level, right? Certainly the NFL, it's you realize that the windows for a completion get smaller, tighter. That you don't have the sort of the time that you may have, like all of a sudden it's a half second as opposed to a second and a half that you
Mhm.
make a decision. You have to be able to process a lot more information a lot more quickly. So like everything else in life, you do it, you adjust to it, you make mistakes, you learn from your mistakes, you put your mind to it, and some adjust better than others, right? That's there's no question about that. Some people are late bloomers, some aren't. But it's a big adjustment. There's no question. I don't know if it's a bigger adjustment than going from high school to college, to be honest with you. I think they're both very significant adjustments that that players have to deal with. It's part of part of the process of becoming a professional athlete in any sport.
Right. I feel like from high school to college, it's like in high school you would play like against one or two of the top players, but then in college you're playing every team is full of top players. I feel like that's like a hard transition, especially.
Well, it is, but the interesting thing, certainly in football, and I think this is true of almost every sport, but even at the NFL level, where everybody is arguably a professional, so by definition,
Right.
you still offensively you target the 2 or 3 weak points on their defense. These guys might be great players, all American, college or whatever, but they're still, they're the guys that can be exploited on the defense. So, in a sense, it's all relative.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because there's always going to be, in most cases, I mean, there are some defenses over the years that have been so strong they didn't have much of a weak spot anywhere. But there's going to be, sort of a weak spot, Achilles heel in any particular defense.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So you backed up Warren Moon. Can you talk a little bit more about approaching every game, as a backup or someone who maybe is coming in from high school to college and is now moving into a backup role behind like an entrenched starter? How you approach that each and every day and the preparation behind that?
Well, I mean, it's a cliche, but I think it's absolutely true that every player, regardless of whether he's or she's a backup or a starter or whatever, you've got to prepare as though you're going to play in the game, and that's doubly important, I think, for traditional backups like I was, because you don't get the practice time that the starter gets. If they're plays run, during the course of a practice, you might get 4 or 5, and the other guy will get 90, 95 or whatever it is. So you've got to prepare as though you're going to play, because at some point you will play. You don't want to be totally unprepared for that opportunity when it comes along. You want to support your starter, even though at the end of the day you would like to beat him out and take his job, but you got to support him, because that's what a teammate should be doing to the starter. Warren was a great quarterback. I mean, he's in the Hall of Fame. I became and still am very friendly with him. Watching him play and watching his skill set, there was no question that he was a much better player than I was. And I think if you're realistic about your skill set and the player in front of you, then that makes it sort of easy to accept the fact that he's simply better, and you prepare as best you can, because he could get hurt or be sick or whatever. Even the great players have bad days where you might have a chance to play. But I think it allows you to accept reality a little bit maybe better than otherwise.
Really accepting your role and like using that towards your advantage, because I feel like every role on the team counts, and if you don't accept it, then you're not like partaking in the team.
Well, no, I think that's true. I think it's a little bit different in terms of being a quarterback.
Yeah, for sure.
You think about basketball, and there's role players. There's guys that come off the bench and they play 6-7 minutes a game, and they're good defensive guys, or they're good 3-point shooters, but they all have weaknesses as well, right? In football, it's a little bit different as a quarterback, because there's only one guy who plays, right? So if you're in the game as a backup, one of two things happened. Either your starter broke a leg, or he just had such a terrible day, which hardly ever happens. Such a terrible day that that you get a chance to play. But then you're the guy, right, for the remainder of that game, and if he's hurt, probably for another 3 or 4 or 5 weeks. So it's a little bit different than that sort of traditional role.
Right.
When you come off the bench, he's a good second quarter guy, and then he's a good fourth quarter guy again for 7 minutes a game, because he's a good rebounder or defensive player or whatever, right? It's a little bit different because it's sort of all or nothing almost in the world of quarterbacks. Not other positions, that's different, offensive tackle or linebacker or whatever, wide receiver. But I think for quarterbacks, it's one of the many unique sort of characteristics of that position.
Sure. And you spent a little time in Europe. Did you see any athletes like approach the sport differently? And if they did, do you have anything that would be helpful towards younger athletes?
Well, I mean, American football was very much a niche sport, in Europe. It was effectively a game that the U.S. troops, brought over with them, to Europe. And after the end of World War II, there were still plenty of troops, Air Force, Army bases, throughout continental Europe as well as in the UK, and that was sort of the beginnings, if you will, of the growth of American football. But it's still very much a niche sport. So yes, I saw different approaches to preparing for American football from European players, but there are things that I wouldn't recommend to American players, because I saw guys smoking on the bench. Halftime, they might have had a beer and a cigarette, to get ready. And the reason is they sort of took the approach, it's because these are all amateurs and just playing for fun. They sort of did what we would do if we went out for a softball game with a bunch of our buddies,
right.
or just a fun tennis match where we weren't really trying to be competitive, but just trying to have a little bit of fun. So those weren't necessarily preparations that I would recommend to anybody.
When you were an AD at West Virginia, did you see like any standout student athletes that maybe you could talk a little bit more about what they did and how they approached being a student athlete, and how maybe any lessons they could impart on any high schoolers coming into the college ranks?
I think a couple of things. One, a high school student coming in should realize what a tremendous opportunity it is. Forget about what sport it is, swimming, track and field, football, baseball. It's a tremendous opportunity to be on scholarship or half scholarship or whatever it may be. And I think they should really realize that they're getting an opportunity and they should totally take advantage of it, right? Secondly, that opportunity really consists not just of playing the sport at the highest level and getting great coaching and making lots of friends and all that, but it involves, representing a university. I think some of the greatest institutions in this country are universities. And so being able to, put a jersey on to represent, Notre Dame or, University of Texas or University of Alabama, or you name it, right? These are all great schools. That's really special. There are people that would, give their left arm if they have that opportunity. So I think they should really make sure they appreciate the opportunity. And appreciating the opportunity also means taking advantage as best they can, to the best of their ability of all the academic opportunities that are there, right? There's a lot of talk in today's society about student loan debt and kids coming out of school, owing 50 grand or, six-figure sums of money, and that prevents them from putting a down payment on a house, and they might have to postpone marriage or having kids because they're carrying this debt around. I mean, think of the 500,000 student athletes every year. They come out of school, debt-free, basically, and that's a gift in today's world. And they got to do something for 4 years that a lot of people would, again, give their left arm to do, which is participate in women's tennis or men's soccer or swimming or rifle or football or softball or whatever it would be. It's a great opportunity, and I think I would want students just to understand that they've got a great chance to really do some great things and be serious about it. Don't sort of dismiss it as you can have fun at school. I mean, you don't have to be in the library every night until midnight, but it's a great opportunity to really take advantage of something that a lot of people would love to get.
So I'm going to ask from like a different perspective. Your role as a parent, everyone I think knows your son Andrew Luck, all-pro quarterback. What role do you think parents should have in their kids' athletic development? Because I think that's a big thing now is, they're signing them up for, select travel teams at 6 years old. What role do you think parents should play?
Well, I think that parents should provide as many opportunities as they're able to for their kids in terms of sport, and that's sport writ very large because there's the sports that we all think about, but then there's all sorts of other activities that can equally be as much fun for kids. I think parents should be supportive. I think parents should stay relatively quiet at a certain age when they trust their children to other coaches, regardless of what sport that is, tennis or boxing or wrestling or football or surfing, you name it, right? I think parents should try not to sort of live vicariously through their kids. Sport's great. It's a good sort of lesson for kids in terms of discipline and working with others and learning a little bit of grit and persistence and all those good things. But it also, I think, maybe most importantly, should provide, and parents should support this, the idea that one should be sort of physically active in one's life. That sport just doesn't mean playing high school baseball and then stopping and never sort of staying active, right? One should, take advantage of sport and what happens as a kid to remain relatively active, whether that's playing a sport as an adult or just staying in shape and doing those things that that are good for one's physical and mental health. But I also really hesitate to give a lot of advice to other parents about how to raise their kids. You know what I mean? I think most parents do a remarkable job of raising their children. We tend to focus on the bad examples, and they always end up in the newspaper or whatever. But I think most parents do absolutely the right thing with their kids, and that's why I think youth sport in this country is so sort of well attended. There's such a big industry because I think again most parents get it and do the right thing with their kids in terms of their children's involvement in sport.
All right. Well, our final question, we ask everyone on each show. What are your top 3 recommendations for young athletes?
Oh, I would say number 1, have fun with the sport that you really enjoy. Number 2, use the sport. Don't let the sport use you. So when I say use the sport, make sure that you don't put all your eggs in one basket. Let the sport take you places that you may not have been able to go before. But don't let the sport sort of control your life to a point where you can't do those things that are fun and enjoyable, right? So use the sport, don't let it use you. And number 3, I can't think of a third thing.
Great. Well, thank you so much for coming on. We really appreciate
Thank you.
it.
Appreciate you taking your time. And
Thank you. Sorry, it's a little bit late. Appreciate you all.
all right.
No problem.
All right. Bye, Morgan. Bye, Jared.
Bye. Thanks again.
You bet.
Thank you.